very much, Kat. Can you see my slideshow? Yeah, great. Okay, so yeah, I'm talking about this method this afternoon, OSL profiling and dating, which is a technique that I've been working on with my colleague Tim Kinnaird, who actually runs the luminescence lab in St Andrews through his company CIfA Luminescence. Okay, so as we all know, dating Earth features is a massive problem for archaeologists, including the fills of cut features if we don't have any material in them that we can use to date them. So in this talk, I'm presenting this new method, OSL profiling and dating, and I'm going to show you some examples of the method in practice, how it works, and just outline briefly some of the potential benefits for archaeology. So, how do we date Earth features? I first was kind of stumped by this problem when taking on my first job in Devon about 25 years ago and coming across the issue of, Devon being completely full of earth banks, field boundary banks, and nobody knowing how old any of them were. My colleagues there had not that long before finished the fieldwork for this project at Roadford, which is in advance of a big reservoir. In fact, we've just finished writing up the monograph about a week ago. So that's good. Um, there, they'd done a hedgerow survey on nearly 50 kilometres of hedgerows. You see them in the diagram. And they'd trial trenched over 50 examples, and they had recovered 0 samples that were suitable for any kind of scientific dating that was available at the time. So really unhelpful. And now, of course, we've had a revolution in spatial data of remote sensing data, interpreted, and of course now LiDAR data, which enormously increases the number of these Earth features. These are just upstanding earthworks that we've got here, which are available for us to study and take into consideration as elements of the historic and the archaeological landscape. But how can we date them? Of course, we've got a lot of well-known problems. Problems with maps and documents, their coverage is limited, their date range is limited. Problems with artifacts, they're infrequently encountered in small trenches or trenches through such features, and typically hard to identify because they might be highly fragmentary and likely to be redeposited. And problems with conventional lab dating, which are largely related to the difficulty of identifying residuality or mixing or redeposition or inversion of samples in these deposits if we're just taking individual scientific dates, either of radiocarbon or luminescence from within an archaeological profile. So these are well-established problems. All archaeologists are familiar with them. And what I'm presenting is one technique which we may be able to use to overcome these issues, some of these issues. And this is the OSL profiling and dating method. And this is a method that we follow basically through 4 steps. We've got the site selection step, and then we've got 3 further steps, 1 in the field and 2 in the laboratory. And I'm going to show you those steps step by step now. So obviously the first step is our project design, assessment survey, whatever it is, integrating all of our GIS and targeting where we're going to be doing our field work using, based on geophysics, based on LiDAR analysis, based on map analysis, whatever that may be. So we've established where our site location is going to be. Our next stage is to go into the field and create OSL profiles. So in this, we are cutting a profile through the feature or features that we're interested in. And we're using this portable OSL reader that you can see my friend Sutkin in the screen using to assess the sediment in the profile in the field in real time. And the advantage of that is that it gives us a much better understanding of the character of the sediments that we're dealing with. So here you can see this is a profile from Denmark, going from the present day to the Neolithic at the bottom. And these are just the samples as they're read through that portable OSL reader. We've got a young sample at the top with just 150 counts of luminescence intensity, and a much older sample at the bottom, 6,500 counts of luminescence intensity. And we've plotted those on this graph to the right. So young at the top, is to the left. To the right, we've got old. The bottom, that's the red one. And what that enables us to do is to try to understand much better the development of that profile in the field. So we can see here we've got a relatively steady progression of age with depth. And at this point, we've got a discontinuity. And that shows us that there's an inversion of material, because below it, we've got our profile continuing. So this is material which has been dug out and inverted in the sequence. So you can see how using this we can establish the depth and the age and depth of the material, relatively speaking, and we can identify where there's any discontinuities or other issues. And that helps us to choose where to put our OSL dating sample. So that's one of the key points about this. It optimizes the selection of sites for dating. A third stage, we take those material back to the lab and we perform a kind of light version of the OSL dating protocol. And that gives us the first indication of absolute age. So that happens in the lab rather than in the field. But that also enables us to understand the site formation much better. So here we can see an example from Zena in Cornwall. There's Sutkin again. And you can see that we can assess the relative chronology of those different elements in the profile. And we've chosen where to put our dating samples in the lab, and then we can actually correlate those data samples back to the profile. So we get a much better understanding of the whole chronology of the feature. So this gives us a solution in 4 steps, from site selection through to OSL dating in the lab, enabling us to understand much better these kinds of features. I'm going to show you a couple of quick examples of the technique in practice to outline some of the benefits. So here's an example from a commercial project which needs to remain anonymous in the east of England. I've kind of amended it so you can't see where it is, but it's a real project, a real commercial project on a big infrastructure program. A site of more than 1.5 hectares excavated over 3 weeks by a load of archaeologists, and no finds at all. Well, one shard of post-medieval pottery from the top of one of these ditches, but otherwise nothing. Okay, so we were able to go in here, and with 1 day of field work, we characterized the exposed profiles, the sections, through those features. And you can see these are our OSL profiles. Blue is young, red is old. And we can then map those onto the features. So here we've got a series of 3 intercutting ditches, and we can map the relative chronology in the field. So that helps us decide where to put our dating samples. Subsequently, we do the 3rd stage in the lab and then the OSL dating. And that enabled us to develop a whole dated sequence, a whole understanding for the sequence of the development of ditches and other features on that site. So these are cut features, pits and ditches only, but we've gone from having no chronology to having a more or less total chronology for the features on the site. Here's a second example. This is King Arthur's Hall down on Bodmin Moor. You can see it's this weird kind of rectangular-ish earthwork. And this was sampled as part of a community project with the Cornwall National Landscape and local community groups. These are the field profiling samples. We did this at high resolution. And you can see here we've got red, old, on top of blue, young. Okay, so that should tell us something. That tells us that if we can get dating samples from underneath the red, we should be able to pin down the construction date for this feature, because we've got a lot of material dug out and inverted to form the bank of this feature, the bank of this material. And indeed, that's what we were able to do. And we were able to date the construction of that strange rectangular earthwork, which is upstanding in the middle of Bodmin Moor, to around about 3000, 3100 BC. So it's some kind of Neolithic, upstanding Neolithic enclosure. So in summary, I hope that what you can see is that this is a cost-effective way of doing this scientific dating, because the profiling enables us to understand the whole feature much more effectively, or series of features. It improves significantly archaeological knowledge outcomes from any project, but it can also potentially help us to target work much more effectively, so we can perhaps reduce the overall costs of projects, thereby by targeting the projects more effectively, also helping to reduce the carbon footprint if we don't need to excavate such enormous areas as we might do otherwise. So it's a great way to target the work. I'm really happy to answer any questions that you might have, as long as they're not too technical, because if they're too technical, I have to send them to my friend Tim.
Thanks, Sam. I don't know if we've got anybody with any questions. Kat, I don't know if there's anything in the chat. If you want to raise your hand if you've got questions.
I think we've got 2 raised hands. I'm just trying to find those people to unmute them.
I can't see any raised hands. How can you unmute them?
Hang on, let me find them first.
Too many people.
There we go. We've got Coralie. And we've got a late joiner who's just made me lose Coralie. Bear with me 1 second. So,
there's Paul Johnson.
You should be unmuted, Coralie.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Oh, well, Sam, that was absolutely fascinating and well done cramming so much into a short time. I'm a dendrochronologist, so I'm going to slightly trump your dating method, but only where timber survives, of course. So this is really, really useful for landscape work, and I do a lot of wooded landscape work too. What I wanted to ask you about is the error margin on the OSL dating. What sort of date ranges are you getting, and does that change through time like radiocarbon does?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the key thing affecting the error margins are the two key things. One is the behavior of the sediments, the quartz which we are sampling, and not all quartzes are as good as each other. So there's a wider error margin, and the other is the extent of mixing in the material. So if you've got a lot of material that's been reworked several times, it's going to have material that's residual from earlier phases in the reworking. We can actually see that, and that's very useful in understanding the formation processes on the site, the understanding, the extent of reworking, maybe how many times the material's been reworked. Typically, the error margin ranges between 5 and 10% of age.
Okay.
So it's not too bad.
No.
Sometimes it's tighter than that, but certainly it's usually within the last few millennia. It's good enough to give us within a particular century often. So it can be pretty good.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sam. That's great.
Okay, our next person is Paul. I'm going to unmute you, Paul.
I think I've just done myself.
Brilliant.
Got ahead of the curve. You're right, Sam. Nice to see you.
Hi, Paul.
I was just quite interested that the examples. I'm just trying to put my hand down, but there we go. The examples that you gave still were sort of reasonably large holes in the ground that you were digging there, and I was just wondering if you could say anything about the potential of the technique from like core samples or boreholes or something like that as an even less intrusive possibility.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, so absolutely, that is entirely possible. You can use boreholes or core samples. In fact, Tim's been doing a big project with Vince Gaffney recently in the North Sea, where they've been getting quite high resolution dating from cores taken from ships through the seabed, through the Mesolithic seabed. So yes, either of those are possible. You just have to keep the core dark as it comes out of the ground, which is not so much of a challenge. And then you can process it on site, or you can take it and process it in the lab. And so if you're wanting to if you don't have an open area, or you don't want to cut small trenches, then coring is a viable option. The only problem we have found is if you're in an area that is very rocky, like most of the Mediterranean, where you tend to just hit a load of rocks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. We've got a question in the chat from Hilary. I can't find you to unmute you, Hilary, so I'm just going to read your question. She says, great talk. How long did it take to do the profiling in the field in your last example, and how long to create the dating?
Okay, so the last example was the King Arthur's Hall one. We were in the field there for 1 day. So we, in fact, we had a terrible car breakdown incident. So we were only in the field actually for 3/4 of the day by the time someone had come and collected us in a Land Rover. In the field for one day, and then there was quite a lot of work on the dating for that. So that, I mean, the key time-consuming aspects of this are the sample preparation in the lab, and obviously the more samples you're preparing, the longer that's going to take, and then the time it takes to actually read out the dates on the OSL reader in the lab. But typically we try to go from fieldwork to having the final results within, say, 2 to 3 months. But of course, in the field, we already have a relative chronology. So we might not have the absolute chronology, but we've got the relative chronology of the features that we're looking at, which can itself be very valuable. As you saw in the example with the intercutting ditches, that can really help us to target areas for investigation on any site in real time.
Brilliant. Okay, I don't think that we have any more hands up at the moment.
I can't see any more, no.
Or any more chat messages. So you can keep putting messages into the chat about this, but I think we will move on to our second presenter for the day, who is Meike van Lit, another one of our committee members, and she'll be talking to us about the Birse Parish in Aberdeenshire, which I have probably pronounced incorrectly. Sorry about that, Meike.
No, that's absolutely correct. Hi everyone. I trust that you can see everything all right. And I'm just going to wing it if not. So yes, it's great to see this many people, and it was a very interesting talk we just had. Definitely going to send the recording off to some friends as well. So I'm Meike. I'm the treasurer of the landscape group, PhD researcher at the University of Glasgow. And I'm just going to talk about a landscape. It's going to be quite chill, no need to focus too much. And at first, I will just say, why am I talking about this area? My research looks at soil health and human activity and how they affect one another. I'm not going to go into more detail than that for now, but the case study that I use is the Fingen Estate, which is a small privately owned estate just an hour away from Aberdeen, and it is part of the Parish of Birse, right there. So I'm working at the Fingen Estate, and I've looked at the wider landscape just to kind of see what the archaeology is like to understand human activity, of course. And before I continue, I will just say that there are 2 fantastic resources that have really helped me and that are interesting to look at for others as well. The first is the book The History in Birse by Robin Callender. He is a local historian who's worked together with the landlords to collect estate records, estate maps, that sort of thing. But he's also collected photographs and stories from the people who've lived in this area. And he has collated it all in this book and in separate publications as well. And it's just really been good to get that overview of what the history was like in this area outside of academic papers. It's good to have this sort of grassroots information as well. And the second resource is the Birse Community Trust, which was founded by Robin Callender, and they are very actively publishing reports on cultural and natural heritage. They are they do the maintenance for some areas as well. So they are quite they've both been a great resource. And I will specifically talk about the fungal, and I'm going to take you on a walk along the fungal.
Hi, Meike. We've got a request in the chat for you to change to full screen view just because the text is very small.
Right. I think it should be possible to change that in your own screen normally, but I will see what I can do. I will just stop share for a second.
Sorry to interrupt there.
No worries at all. I will just do that. There we go. Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
All right, brilliant. So yes, the fungal is a north-south route through the Forest of Birse. It goes from the River Dee to the River North Esk, just about. And it is a natural route, so it's a fairly old route as well. And the first map where it's somewhat presented on is this map from the 1630s. We see the Water of Few, which runs east-west through the parish, and then just at the bottom of it, you can see the north-south stream, which is the Slack Burn, and the fungal runs just about parallel to the Slack Burn until it gets to the source of that river or stream. So we will go fungling through time, if you will go with me. As I said, it is a natural route through it's a natural pass through the hills. And there is no direct evidence of it having been used in prehistory, but there is a lot of prehistoric activity in the area, such as hut circles. There's quite a few of them, but I will admit that this one is my favorite, because the first time that I came to the Birse area with my supervisors, they are both soil scientists, and they stood on the banks of this hut circle. They looked around the landscape and said, I wonder what the archaeology is like, which was to me a very interesting insight in how things that may be obvious to me in the landscape might not be obvious to people from other disciplines. And you know, that's just an interesting thing to take away, but it's one of the few hut circles in this area. In the same field, there's quite a few clearance cairns. Again, no direct proof that that is prehistoric, but it's definitely a sign of intense activity. And within the Fingen estate specifically, there's 3 standing stones, and there are more in the wider parish as well. So if we move on to the medieval period, this picture that I showed earlier has the boundaries of the parish of Birse, and the very observant of you may have seen that there's an area called the Forest of Birse, but it's not very green, which you might expect with a forest. And that would be right. It is not green, it is not foresty there at all now. But in the 11th century up till the 15th century, this area used to be a royal hunting reserve, and later given in maintenance of the bishops of Aberdeen as well. As I said, it's a natural route, and mainly at this period of time, the fungal and the hills around it were known to be wild and unruly, and they were mainly popular by cattle raiders, really. And the only settlement in this area are summer shealing huts, of which this is not an example, technically, but it's just a hidden bit of stone structure that you do find amongst some of the trees. And the fungal was mainly used by cattle raiders and that sort of thing, as I said. When we move on to the early modern period, the route was again interesting, but this time the focus lay on whiskey smuggling. The still you see here is not from the area, it's from the Loch Lomond area. I've just casually borrowed it for a second. But there are 4 farms that were known to have illegal whiskey distilleries in the hills surrounding the fungal. And the fungal was then used to smuggle the whiskey south or north, depending on where you were along the route. Again, cattle raiding, must have said that in the wrong slide. And the problem with the cattle raiding was that the bailies that were in control of this area could not follow the cattle raiders because they used heavy and unpracticed horses, and the route was just not accessible to that. And around this time, because of the whiskey smuggling and the cattle trade, the area had quite a population boom, which we can see in the town splitting that goes on around it. So basically, town splitting meant or happened when the fields that belonged to a certain town or farm or village were getting too far away. So people from that village moved to the other side of the fields, but they stayed associated with the original town that they came from, which then causes place names such as Westercloon, Midcloon, and Eastercloon in this area. And then if we move on to the industrial period, the fungal was being improved quite a lot. It was used for recreative, outdoorsy stuff, because this is also the period in which we get the romanticization of the Lake District and the wild, unruly places of the Scottish Highlands, etc. But the fungal was also improved because grouse shooting increased significantly. And the hills around the fungal started to look like this because of heather burning. And the fungal was really the only easy way to get to the grouse butts, because they didn't really have quad bikes at that time. And if we then again look at the wider landscape, tree plantations really boomed, and that meant that quite a few sawmills were built in the area. And interestingly, they were mainly water powered by the water of Few, the River Few. And the picture you can see here is one of my favorites. This was the turning mill, which had fallen into disuse, then purchased by the Birse Community Trust, who got it working again. And currently this mill is used to make all the wooden fences that are needed on the lands managed by the Birse Community Trust. And the man that you see in this picture is one in a long line of mill turners. His grandfather and further back were in charge of the mill, and when the mill was put back in use, he was asked to come and help out. And nowadays, the area around the fungal is used mainly for, in the valleys, there's crop cultivation and cattle grazing. On the hillsides, there's a lot more sheep grazing as well. And there's a lot of recreative outdoorsy activities, such as hiking. There's some BMXing around. And if you do go to that area, there's a fantastic cafe where I really recommend you have something to eat, not being paid by them, but they are fantastic. And another estate within the Birse parish houses the Highland Unbridled Company, which allows you to ride horses in the landscape. And one of the routes that they offer is a route along the fungal and the hills around it, showing that there is a continuous meaning to this ancient route as well, and a bit of a touristic meaning to it. So now what? For archaeologists, I think it is clear that the aim of the game is not to find archaeological features and leave it at that. The point of it is to understand how humans lived in the past. So in my case, I am using information from archaeological features, historical documents, that sort of thing, to understand how that has affected the landscape. And I do this to, get insights in sustainability practices and policies, but also to understand what the difference is between the concepts natural versus cultural, or, of course, if they are pretty much the same thing. So that was a very quick run through a very long hike. I hope you're not too exhausted after that. If you're out of breath, I don't know, get a drink. But thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, you can, of course, ask. Or if I've just given you a recommendation for a place to go hiking, you're welcome and enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mickey. That's great. I can see we've got applause on the React already. again, if you want to ask Mickey any questions about this, if you pop your hand up or put the question into the chat. We've got one from Richard M, who says, why is it called the fungal?
There is actually no consensus about that. It is there's some other names for it as well. I forgot what it was, but that came from the Gaelic for cattle root. But the reason why it's called the fungal, no idea. But that name has been recorded from as early as the 1700s, I believe. So who knows?
And another one from the chat from Diptaka. Do you want to unmute, or would you like me to read your question? I'm going to read it. Hi, Mickey. Was interested to know what is the status of protection stroke designation of the archaeological features that you spoke about in this landscape?
There's a few. So there's 3 hut circles in the one field. They are not scheduled, I believe, but they are known and watched, but they're not scheduled or anything. And I think there's very, very little scheduled archaeology in this area or listed or protected. But I'm not the first one to have found this. Most of this information is known on the historic environment records, etc. So there is people are aware. I'm not entirely sure of the exact protection or schedule status of it.
Thanks, Mickey. Yeah, so Diptaka says, yes, they were wondering if this information was known to the HER records, and you've answered their question. So thanks for that.
I will say that there's part of what I'm doing is also looking at the satellite imagery in the area, and there's quite a few things that don't seem to be recorded, but that do look like something. So, there's not a lot of construction going on, so there might definitely be undiscovered archaeology to an extent.
I mean, I definitely second that from my own experiences of upland areas in England, that, rural areas that are outside of traditionally thought of development do tend to be under-recorded as a whole, and under designated, shall we say. So it's really important when people do these landscape studies to report them and add to our knowledge of those areas. And I'm guessing also, not quite sure how it works in Scotland, but certainly in England, a lot of these undesignated features do get protection via agri-environment schemes and that kind of protection as opposed from the legal system. So depending on whether the farmer has opted to join one of those schemes, that can sometimes help protect the archaeological features.
And, most farmers are absolutely interested in preserving the archaeology that they do have. So they're always very helpful in that sense anyway.
Okay, I can't see any more hands up. And I don't think we've got any further chat messages. So Sam, Mickey, is there anything else you'd like to add to today's discussion?
Thanks, Kat. And thanks, Mickey, for your talk. No, nothing specific, but one or two people asked in the chat about things related to the OSL profiling. So I put a couple of references there in case anyone wants to follow up. And just to say, if anyone finds this, an interesting or possibly useful methodology, but you're not sure about its potential or how it can be used, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. Really happy to provide advice at project planning stage or other stages.
Brilliant. So this is the point where I thank everyone for attending today and remind you all that if you're a CIfA member and these sessions are relevant to your personal development plan, then this counts as 45 minutes of bite-sized CPD. We've even got a groovy logo for that was supplied by CIfA. And to tell you about next talk, which these talks are every other month. They remain on Wednesday lunchtimes for the time being because we've got excellent attendance. So we're going to stick with that slot. And the next scheduled lunchtime talk will be on March the 12th. By attending today, you get a sneaky peek at the content. So first speaker is going to be myself. In my day job, when I'm not working on the SIG committee, I am the Senior Peatland Historic Environment Officer at Natural England. So we'll be looking at archaeology in the context of peatland restoration. And we also have a talk from Ian Hulston, who is the Director at LDA Design and Fellow of the Landscape Institute, who's going to be talking about landscape character assessment and the role of cultural heritage, including a case study of the Cotswold National Landscape. So really looking forward to that. And I will also say that obviously the committee are not just going to talk at you for the time being. So we started off with the easy ones, which are the personal interests of our committee members, but we are looking proactively asking you as our membership what you would like to hear about and looking for people who would like to volunteer to do one of these 15 minutes talks and reach out to this wider community. So that would be from July onwards. So if you have got a topic that you think would be of interest to members, please get in touch with us via the group's email address, and I'm going to post that in the chat now. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for chairing, Kat. And thanks to everyone for coming, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.